So, a friend of ours said that we should do an episode on purity culture, which that's if you don't know, that's churchy. Well, actually, that's like an anti-churchy like phrase, like purity culture. That's not really something they say in church. Oh, here we have purity culture.
Yeah, they talk about being pure, but they would never say purity culture.
Right.
Together like that.
But it's what they say to refer to the very strict standards of like biblical purity, sexuality, stuff like that.
Not having sex till you're married.
Right, not having sex till you're married, only having sex a man and a woman, all the things that go along with that, purity.
Right.
So it was interesting because we were talking about that kind of the other day as far as the way I feel about what we did. You know, we had an affair. We've kind of touched on all the reasons for how that happened.
Yeah.
I think we need to write a book about our whole story because it's very interesting.
There's lots of little details that are hard to just cover.
Yeah. Well, so, you know, it was purity culture. Mm-hmm. Is the essence of it is I wanted to be with you. You wanted to be with me, but for the sake of protecting people, we were told not to do that. And then you were encouraged to be with somebody else. You know, they're a great person. They have a charismatic personality and fun and all that stuff. And so it's like, okay, I trust you, you know, but I mean, like the truth is the truth and you wanted to be with me and I wanted to be with you.
The truth comes out always.
Yeah. And so anyway, that's one of the bad, harmful effects of purity culture. But anyway, we were talking about how looking back, it's like, you know, as more and more time passes, I reflect on us as like just something that happened because like obviously that would happen in a situation like that. Mm-hmm. How would you expect that not to happen? And so it starts to seem much more purposeful. Like this is actually what something God would like to happen, being in a cult and all this shit happening, you know, between us and being encouraged away from each other. And just so everybody knows, and in case anybody's listening who was involved in that, we fully forgive. We don't blame anyone for our mistakes or our decisions or things that they thought they were doing. I believe they had the right intentions, you know, and stuff. But more or less, purity culture is a harmful thing because it's taking people's will. You know, people have a desire. Like God gave you the desires to seek out certain things, and if you make mistakes along the way, that's your own business.
Well, and I would just like to point out that, you know, when they talk about purity in the Bible and sex is between like a husband and a wife and stuff, people forget that in those times, women and men got married like when they were teenagers, like in the height of their like sexual frustration. Like women were married off as soon as they had their period. I mean,
I don't think that's the height of women's sexual frustration.
It's not. It's probably the height of men's. But I mean, it took them a little while, you know, to get married off or whatever because the man had to pay the dowry and stuff. So I did hear that the height of women's sexual frustration or sexual desire is like after menopause, which is pretty interesting. But anyway, they got married really early. And now people get married, you know, in their late 20s, early 30s. That's pretty common. I think that's like the average. You know, I mean, there's some people who get married earlier, but that's a lot less common now. People are getting married and having children a lot later than they did way back then. And so, I mean, for a 13, 14, 15-year-old to not have sex till they're married, it's really not that hard.
Right.
So, I mean, just to also put that into perspective.
That's interesting. I mean, that's construed certain ways nowadays. You know, doesn't matter what history was then.
Right.
You know, you're not supposed to have sex till you're married.
Does it matter if you're a 40-year-old virgin?
Yeah. We don't care if you're like, never mind.
Anyway.
filter's off here, but not 100% off. So what has been your experience with purity culture?
Well, I agreed with it. And to an extent, I still do agree that it's better to only have sex with your husband or wife, with one person, for the rest of your life. I think there's something spiritual that happens, when you have sex. And you can't just not subconsciously compare it to all the other people that you've had sex with if you've had sex with multiple people. That's just not possible. So,
right.
So my experience with it, though, was I grew up going to a Seventh-day Adventist elementary school, middle school. I started going to public school in high school. But in middle school, we moved and we started going to a church that our neighbors went to, which I loved because their kids' church was super fun. I started going there when I was like 10. And it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And it was awesome and I loved it. And so in, I think, middle school, you could take a class, it wasn't a sex ed class, but it was about purity, and then you could do a ceremony at the end of the year and your dad would give you your purity ring, basically.
So they had to come to school?
No, it was at church.
Oh.
So the church that I was going to did that.
Oh.
And so all the girls got to pick out their purity rings, and me and my two best friends we all did it together, of course, because we do everything together. And I think my sister still has her ring. I feel like she still wears it sometimes on her other finger. So you're supposed to wear it on your wedding finger, and then when you get married, your husband takes that off and puts on your wedding ring. And at 13, we were like, oh my God, that's so cute. Yes. And crying and, it was a whole thing. And so we were supposed to wear it all the time. And also.
Yeah, like a wedding ring.
Yeah. And the Jonas Brothers also wore purity rings. And so we didn't feel as bad at the time. And so, yeah, that's a whole thing. It's the purity ring thing goes along with the purity culture. I feel like it's you're showing people I'm a virgin and I'm proud of it and I'm not having sex until I get married.
Right.
So anyway, I get a boyfriend in high school that I really like. And we end up having sex and I'm still wearing the ring and I'm super ashamed that I'm still wearing this ring, And every time I look down at it, I'm oh, this is so wrong, I think I was looking at it during that time and I was oh my gosh, this is I shouldn't be doing this, but we're already doing it. So
the hanky panky?
Yeah. So it's I can't turn back now,
Oh my goodness.
And so what happened was I told a couple of my friends because I felt so guilty, and then went down the grapevine. I don't know who he told, because actually some random person came up to me and was like, hey, you were finally not a virgin, high five. And I was like, holy fuck, how do you know that? And so anyway, spiraled down. It got down to this girl who liked him and dated him while we were on a break. She found out and she was pissed. So she told her mom, and this girl also went to our church.
Oh.
So her mom told our youth group pastor, that we had sex. And so our youth group pastor told the person's house that he was living with, because his mom was on drugs and his dad wasn't around. And so he lived with this other family. And so he told them, and then that family kicked him out of the house. And he told, yeah.
What?
Yes. He was sleeping he was sleeping on the slide at some elementary school playground. So.
Never mind.
I know. So, so then they told my mom, and then my mom found out when I was getting my nails done with one of my other friends, and I remember calling me.
Those types of people kick their kid out?
It wasn't their kid. It was their friend. It was their kid's
They're
friend.
looking out for him.
Yeah, he was staying with them for probably two years at that point. He was living with them.
Those types of people kick a kid out. They're walking around right now with masks on, Lysoling every fucking thing in sight because they're scared.
Anyway, I really love them so much. So those people.
Really?
Yes, they're so.
Do I know them?
No.
I'm all talking shit.
Looking back, like, he had probably done a lot of other questionable shit that I didn't know about, that they knew about, and that was probably like the final straw for them.
But that's the problem.
I know. I know. I'm just saying they're really nice people.
All right. Yeah, continue.
Okay, so then my mom found out, and I was getting my nails done with a friend, and my mom called me and was like, we need to talk. I'm here to pick you up. And I was like, what did I do? Like, what the heck? And so she brought me, like, she drove me up to, like, this, like, high point where we could oversee the city. Not the place where we go, a different spot. And she was like, how come you didn't tell me, like, that you were having sex? And I was like, what the heck? And then she said my youth pastor's name, and she was like, he told me everything. And I was like, how does he know? Like, what the heck is happening right now?
How old was he?
I don't know.
Yes.
Yes, what?
Guess.
Oh, 35, 40? He wasn't that old. He wasn't married yet. He's married now.
I'm just trying to gauge in my mind what opinion I have of him.
So, yeah, I was like super confused, and my mom was like, we need to get you on birth control, and, so we both cried a little bit in the car, and I was like, okay, sure, like, I'll go on birth control. But it was so weird because I was like, how do all these people know without me telling them? And, like, why are people
obviously
telling
dudes
my
going
mom?
around.
Well, right, but
guess who got the dick wet?
I'm just saying, how, like, does my youth pastor know and my mom know?
Dick
and
shit.
My youth pastor didn't even, like, come up to me and ask me, hey, somebody's mom told me that this happened. Like, did that happen? Like, are you guys okay? None of that. Just called my mom. And so that's where I feel like I got my first, like, hurt from church. Like, wow, I really trusted you, and you didn't even do me the courtesy of, like, asking me if it was true. And I feel like that's what hurt the most. Like, it was true, obviously, but you couldn't even talk to me about it before tattling on me.
This is really interesting. It's interesting how similar this is to like the situation that we went through, and like leaving and stuff. It's like, here are some people going through a pivotal fucking moment of their life. This has never happened to them before. You're trying to navigate that. You're trying to figure that out, and you're probably going to do a good job, because humans left, I believe, to their own devices will figure out the right thing to do.
Yeah.
People don't want to be in pain and, like, suffering. What causes the pain and suffering is when you're dealing with something difficult and people come in like that. Then you start to do even more bad things, or actually start to harm yourself, because now there's all this, like, negativity surrounding something that is a thing.
Yeah, so then,
like, y'all ain't having sex.
So guess what happened 3 months later? I moved to Chico.
Oh, that was 3 months. Sorry, I spit all over you.
Maybe 4. That was my senior year in high school, and it was the end of my senior year.
Oh, wow. I wasn't thinking of it like that.
Yeah, so then I moved to Chico, and I go to Chico State, and I'm like...
So that's even weirder, because you're, like, almost a grown-ass adult. I mean, no offense to Mom, because it sounds like she handled it pretty lovingly.
She did a really good job. I wasn't mad at her at all, actually.
Right.
I was mad at my youth pastor for not talking to me about it first, because I feel like that's common courtesy. Like, you don't ask me if it's even true, and then you go and tattle, like,
well,
to
that's
my
why I
mom.
asked how old he was, because it sounds like a pretty dipshit thing to do. I mean, obviously, well, it sounds like they needed to have an intervention. with you
Yeah.
before just going and ratting behind your back so that, you're all completely caught off guard.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess
at least, I mean, it's like call you both in as a family, you and your mom, and say, we're concerned, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
And I get, cause like,
well, here's another thing though. I'm sorry.
I was a teenager at the time, so I was 17. So I get that perspective, but at the same time, you can't just go telling people's parents something that's not true. Which
you're like 90% more an adult than you are a child at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's weird. People should be allowed to walk out their own life. It goes back to the thing we were talking about, like staying in a church that you were harmed in around the same people that you were harmed with or by. Mm-hmm. How can you possibly assess that situation being in that situation still?
Well, and so that was kind of like the thing for me when I moved to Chico. I was like, I guess like maybe I should look for a church, but at the same time, I was actually on like the youth group leadership team. So I was pretty influential in my youth group, I guess you could say.
Well, you're influential everywhere.
So at that point I was like, okay, well, like what's kind of the point? Because if they're just going to treat me like that probably happens everywhere. So it took me 4 years to actually I did go to a couple of churches in Chico just like on Easter or something, and I hated them all. And then I finally found Remedy, and I was like, oh, I think I'm finally ready to try church again. But I think it's interesting that our friend was talking about that, because that was really my first experience in church hurt and why I wanted to stop going to church in the first place.
Yeah.
Which is probably pretty common.
I guess my opinion of purity culture is pretty similar to every other way the church intervenes in people's lives. Is it's not your concern. It's not your fucking concern. I mean, gosh, I don't want to pull out Bible verses and stuff, but what did Jesus do when the woman was caught in adultery? What did he do? He condemned the people that were being condemning. He didn't say anything to her except you're forgiven. Mm-hmm. It's just what is with religious people and behaving in such a way that we even have a name for it? Purity culture. It's a club.
Right.
It's just stupid. Thank you for checking out the Church Podcast. Please like and subscribe to our channel. To support the channel, go to patreon.com/The Church Podcast. If you have any information or an idea that could improve the Church Podcast, please leave a comment or leave a private message through our social accounts. Take care.